Tonight we drift back in time, not to watch a great battle or witness a coronation, but to notice what few ever mention in medieval tales: the smell, the itch, the quietly tolerated discomfort of living, breathing, and sweating in a world before soap was common, before privacy was valued, and before disease was understood. We won't judge. We won't laugh. We'll simply observe, gently, curiously, what hygiene meant in the Middle Ages. It may be disgusting to us now, but to them it was simply life. For the next while, we'll walk quietly through their world. We'll visit their bathhouses and their bedchambers. We'll stand in their kitchens and peek into their privies. We'll understand their fears, their beliefs, and their small, daily acts of care. This is not a story of progress or advancement. It's simply a story of people doing their best with what they had, believing what they believed, and finding dignity in the smallest gestures. So settle in. Let the modern world fade away, and let us begin our gentle journey into the past. Before examining how medieval people stayed clean or didn't, we must understand what they believed. In the medieval worldview, water was both cleansing and dangerous. To bathe too often was to weaken the body, to open one's pores and invite illness. This wasn't ignorance. It was caution, based on centuries of observation and fear of unseen forces. The medieval understanding of the body was based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was about balance. Too much of any one humor could lead to illness. Many believed that washing away protective oils left the body exposed to bad humors or invisible vapors. And so, bathing was not avoided due to laziness, but out of a deep-rooted sense of medical caution. Physicians of the time wrote extensively about the dangers of excessive bathing. They warned that hot water could open the pores too wide, allowing disease to enter the body. Cold water, they said, could shock the system and upset the delicate balance of humors. For the devout, cleanliness also had a spiritual meaning. A clean soul was more important than a clean body. And so monks often scrubbed their hands before meals or prayers, but might not bathe fully for weeks or even months. St. Jerome wrote that he who has once washed in Christ has no need to wash again. This spiritual cleansing was seen as far more important than physical cleanliness. Yet even in monasteries, there were rules about cleanliness. Monks were required to wash their hands before meals and after using the latrine. They washed their feet regularly and changed their linen undergarments. The Church taught that cleanliness was next to godliness, but this referred more to moral purity than physical cleanliness. A clean heart was more important than a clean body. Understanding medieval hygiene requires understanding this worldview, where spiritual health was paramount, where the body was seen as vulnerable and in need of protection, and where water was both a blessing and a potential curse. For the wealthy, bathing was a luxury, but also a risk. They might bathe once a month or even less frequently. The bath was a major event, requiring servants to heat water, prepare the tub, and often attend to the bather's needs. When the wealthy did bathe, they did so carefully. The water was scented with herbs, not just for fragrance, but for their supposed medicinal properties. Rosemary was thought to strengthen the memory. Lavender was believed to calm the nerves. The act of bathing was private, intimate, and somewhat fearful. People approached it with the same caution they might show toward medicine, necessary sometimes, but potentially dangerous. The bathing chamber was a sanctuary. Candles flickered on stone walls. Steam rose from the herb-scented water. Servants moved quietly, attending to every need. For those who could afford it, private bathing chambers offered ultimate luxury. The tub might be lined with cloth, the water perfumed with expensive oils. Servants would attend to every need, washing the bather's hair, scrubbing their back, even reading to them as they soaked. But even among the wealthy, the fear remained. The understanding that this luxury, this pleasure, came with risk. The pores, once opened, might allow harmful vapors to enter. The body, once cleansed of its protective oils, might be vulnerable to illness, and so they bathed, but carefully, rarely, but thoroughly, with herbs for protection and prayers for safety. Bathhouses did exist, and in some parts of medieval Europe, especially early on, they were quite common. Picture a timber-framed building with steam rising from behind slatted walls. Inside, long wooden tubs filled with hot water, candles flickering on damp stone, herbs scattered for fragrance. The interior of a medieval bathhouse was a world unto itself. The air was thick with steam and the scent of herbs. Wooden tubs, hewn from single logs or constructed from oak staves, filled the space. Some were large enough for several people, others designed for solitary bathing. Heating the water was a constant task. Large cauldrons bubbled over fires, tended by bathhouse attendants. The water was often mixed with herbs, lavender for relaxation, rosemary for invigoration, rose petals for their scent. Bathhouses were communal and often co-ed, a place to socialize, to eat, to discuss the news of the town. These weren't just places to get clean. They were social centers. People came to catch up on gossip, to conduct business, to relax after a long day of labor. The wealthy might rent private rooms, but most people bathed COMMUNALLY. Contemporary artwork from the period shows us what these bathhouses looked like. People of all social classes mingled in the warm, steamy atmosphere. Nobles might bathe alongside. Merchants and craftspeople, social distinctions temporarily dissolved in the communal waters. But as time passed, bathhouses fell out of favor. Concerns over morality, sin, and later the Black Death led many towns to close them entirely. The church had always been somewhat suspicious of bathhouses. The mixing of sexes, the nudity, the atmosphere of relaxation and pleasure, all of this seemed potentially sinful. When the plague arrived, these concerns became practical fears. Disease was thought to spread through bad air, miasma. The warm, moist atmosphere of bathhouses was seen as particularly dangerous. People believed that the steam could carry disease from one person to another. By the 16th century, most had disappeared. Private, in-home bathing became the only option, and only for the wealthy. For everyone else, cleanliness came in smaller gestures. A cloth, a basin, a rinse behind the ears. Without access to bathhouses, most people had to make do with what they had. A basin of water, a cloth, perhaps some soap if they were fortunate. The daily ritual of washing became simpler, more private, more perfunctory. The loss of bathhouses marked the end of an era, but it didn't mark the end of the human desire for cleanliness and comfort. People adapted, finding new ways to maintain their hygiene and dignity within the constraints of their changing world. If the body wasn't cleaned often, the clothes it touched were. Linen, light and absorbent, was worn next to the skin. It collected sweat, body oil, and dirt, and it could be laundered, boiled in lye or ash water, and hung to dry in the sun. The process of laundering was labor-intensive. Clothes were sorted by color and fabric. Linen was boiled in large cauldrons with lye made from wood ash. The caustic solution ate away at dirt and oils, but it also slowly ate away at the fabric itself. Washerwomen earned their living with their hands. The lye was harsh, caustic. It cracked and burned the skin, but it was effective. The linen that emerged from the wash was white, clean, and ready to be worn again. After washing, the linen was hung to dry. The sun bleached it whiter, and the fresh air removed the last traces of the caustic wash. The result was cloth that looked and smelled clean. This created the illusion of cleanliness. A nobleman might not have bathed in weeks, but his shirt was fresh, his outer garments brushed, his hair combed, and so by medieval standards he was clean. For women, chemises, long linen shifts, served the same purpose. Undergarments were practical, simple, and meant to be sacrificial. The chemise was a woman's most important garment. It was worn day and night, changed regularly, and washed frequently. It protected the expensive outer garments from the oils and odors of the body. They absorbed the worst so the skin could rest. The laundry told the story of medieval life. The linen that had been worn closest to the skin was the most soiled. It had absorbed sweat, oils, and odors, but it had also protected the more expensive garments from this contamination. The cycle of wearing and washing was constant. A wealthy person might have several chemises, rotating them regularly. The poor might have only one or two, making the washing and drying cycle more challenging. Maintaining clean linen was expensive. The fabric itself was costly. The washing required materials, ash, soap, sometimes imported items like starch. The labor was skilled and time-consuming. The result was a society where appearance mattered more than reality. People might be dirty beneath their clothes, but they looked clean. The visible parts, the linen at the neck and wrists, the outer garments, the hair, were carefully maintained. Social status was reflected in the quality and quantity of linen. The wealthy had multiple changes of undergarments, all kept scrupulously clean. The poor might have only one chemise, worn until it fell apart. The absence of clean linen was a mark of poverty. The care of linen was women's work, and it was considered essential knowledge. Mothers taught daughters not just how to wash clothes, but how to sort them, how to make lye, how to judge when a garment was truly clean. Linen was more than just cloth. It was a technology, a social marker, and a form of protection. It allowed medieval people to maintain the appearance of cleanliness even when the reality was quite different. And now we arrive at what may be the least romantic corner of medieval life. Toilets, if they could be called that, varied widely. In a castle, one might find a garderobe, a narrow shaft carved into the stone wall, leading to the outside air. Waste dropped straight down, often into a moat or a pit. The engineering was simple but effective. The shaft was narrow enough to prevent people from falling through, but wide enough to allow waste to fall freely. Yeah, height ensured that odors didn't drift back up into the castle. Larger castles might have multiple garderobes, serving different levels and different social groups. The lord's private garderobe might be larger and more comfortable than those used by servants. In towns, communal privies served whole neighborhoods. The smell? Unavoidable. The flies? Constant. Town privies were less sophisticated than castle garderobes. They were often simple structures built over pits or connected to basic drainage systems. Multiple people might use them simultaneously. In homes, the most common solution was a chamber pot, a ceramic or metal bowl tucked beneath. A bed-chamber pots were the most common toilet solution for most people. They were made of clay, ceramic, or sometimes metal. They were kept in bedrooms for nighttime use. When venturing outside was dangerous or impractical in the morning, it was emptied, sometimes into a designated latrine, more often straight into the street. A call of gardez-vous warned passersby. It comes from the French, gardez l'eau, watch out for the water. The euphemism water was used to make the practice seem less offensive, but everyone knew what was really being thrown. The timing was usually early morning, when the streets were less crowded. This was not laziness. It was city planning, long before sewers were imagined. Medieval cities had no infrastructure for waste disposal. Streets were the only option for getting rid of human waste. Rain would eventually wash it away, but until then it accumulated. Some cities employed street cleaners, men who would collect waste and remove it from the city. These were among the lowest paying jobs, but they were essential for preventing disease and maintaining some semblance of sanitation. Religious communities often had more sophisticated systems. Monasteries might build their latrines over streams, allowing running water to carry waste away. This was an early form of sewage disposal. Even in religious communities, waste disposal was a practical concern. Monastic rules often specified times for using the latrine, requirements for cleanliness, and penalties for improper waste disposal. The wealthy might have private latrines in their gardens. These were more elaborate structures, often built over deeper pits. They might have stone or wooden seats, and sometimes even primitive forms of ventilation. The contrast between elaborate dining rituals and crude waste disposal was stark. People who washed their hands in silver basins before meals might use the same garderobes as their servants. The medieval period saw the gradual evolution from the crudest forms of waste disposal to more sophisticated systems. It was a slow process, driven by necessity and the hard-learned understanding that waste and disease were connected. If people didn't remove odor, they often chose to hide it. Wealthy nobles used pomanders, small decorative orbs filled with herbs, spices, and resin. Worn on chains or belts, they released gentle scent with every movement. The creation of a pomander was an art. Different herbs and spices were combined for their complementary scents. Lavender for its calming properties, rosemary for memory, cloves for their antiseptic qualities. The pomander was both practical and decorative. It served as jewelry, but its primary function was to create a personal atmosphere of pleasant scent. The wearer carried their own aromatic environment with them. Pomanders were expensive to make and maintain. The metalwork required skilled craftsmen. The herbs and spices were costly, especially exotic ones imported from distant lands. Only the wealthy could afford such luxuries. The spice trade was driven partly by the desire for pleasant scents. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these weren't just for cooking. They were essential ingredients in the medieval battle against unpleasant odors. Cloaks and gowns were often dusted with powder, sometimes floral, sometimes chalk. The scent didn't remove the smell. It simply competed with it. Scented powders were made from ground flowers, herbs, and minerals. Rose petals were dried and powdered. Violet flowers were processed the same way. Orris root, imported from the Mediterranean, was particularly prized for its iris-like scent. The application of powder was an art. Too much would create visible dust on the clothing. Too little would be ineffective. The skilled ladies' maid knew exactly how much to apply, and where Hygiene became a kind of theater, a way to present order, even when the body was tired, dirty, and sore. The mirror became a tool of transformation. People would check their appearance, adjust their clothing, ensure that their public face was presentable. What lay beneath was private. Hidden social interactions became performances of cleanliness. People moved in ways that would display their clean linen, their scented clothing, their careful grooming. It was a form of social theater. An entire industry developed around concealing odors. Perfumers, sachet makers, candle makers who specialized in scented products. These craftsmen provided the tools for medieval people to create their aromatic armor. Private spaces became sanctuaries of scent. Bedrooms were filled with sachets, aromatic herbs, scented candles. These rooms provided relief from the harsh realities of medieval life. Medieval books contained detailed recipes for creating scented products. These weren't just cosmetic. They were considered essential for health and social acceptability. Creation of perfumes was a skilled profession. Apothecaries understood not just which plants were aromatic, but how to extract their essences, how to blend them, how to make them last. Perfumes were given as gifts, treasured possessions. A small bottle of rose oil or lavender essence was a luxury that could transform a person's daily experience. Social class was marked by scent as much as by clothing. The wealthy moved in aromatic clouds, while the poor had no such luxury. Scent became another marker of social distinction. Even in religious settings, the divide was apparent. The wealthy brought their scented world with them, while the poor had to rely on the church's own aromatic offerings, incense and holy oils. The medieval use of scent was more than vanity. It was an attempt to create beauty, pleasure, and dignity. In a world that often offered little of any of these things, soap did exist, made from animal fat and wood ash, rough to the touch and harsh on the skin. The process of making soap was complex and dangerous. Wood ash was mixed with water to create lye, a caustic solution that could burn skin and eyes. The lye was then combined with animal fat in a delicate balance. Soap making was a skilled profession. Too much lye would create a soap that was too harsh, burning the skin. Too little would create a mixture that wouldn't solidify properly. The balance had to be perfect. It was used mostly on laundry, rarely on the body, unless soft, with lard and scented with rosemary or lavender. Laundry soap was harsh by necessity. It had to cut through grease, dirt, and body oils. The women who used it paid a price. Their hands were often cracked and burned from the caustic mixture. For personal use, soap was often modified. Lard was added to make it gentler on the skin. Herbs were mixed in for their scent and supposed medicinal properties. The wealthy could afford gentler soaps. These were often made with olive oil instead of animal fat, creating a milder product. They were scented with imported herbs and spices. Soap-making knowledge was passed down through generations. Recipes were carefully guarded trade secrets. The best soap makers were highly valued craftsmen. Washing one's hands or face was scented. Water was common among the wealthy. Servants would bring rose water or vinegar diluted with herbs in ceramic jugs. A cloth was soaked, wrung out, and used to gently wipe down the skin. The preparation of scented water was an art. Different herbs were used for different purposes. Rose water was cooling and pleasant. Lavender water was calming. Vinegar water was believed to have antiseptic properties. The act of washing with scented water was more than cleansing. It was a ritual of luxury and care. The scented water was warm, the clothes were soft, and the process was unhurried. It was cooling, soothing, and considered enough. Medieval physicians understood that harsh soaps could damage the skin. They recommended gentle washing with scented water for daily cleansing, reserving stronger soaps for times when thorough cleaning was essential. Religious communities often led the way in developing gentler cleansing methods. Convents and monasteries had herb gardens and the knowledge to create effective, gentle cleansing solutions. A market developed for different types of cleansing products. People could choose between harsh, cheap soaps for laundry and gentler, more expensive products for personal use. The medieval approach to cleansing was more sophisticated than often assumed. People understood the difference between harsh and gentle cleaning, the importance of scent, and the value of different methods. For different purposes, hair was combed, often and carefully. Hair care was one of the most important aspects of medieval grooming. Both men and women spent considerable time on their hair, not just for appearance but for health and social acceptability. Delousing was a routine part of medieval life. Small combs with tightly set teeth were used to remove lice and nits. Lice was a constant problem in medieval life. They thrived in the warm, rarely washed environment of medieval hair. Regular combing was essential to prevent infestations from becoming overwhelming. Different combs served different purposes. Wide-toothed combs were used for general hair care. Fine-toothed combs were specifically designed for removing lice and nits. The wealthy had decorated combs made from ivory or precious metals. For many women, hair was kept long but always bound or covered. For men, a simple trim, or in later periods, a bowl cut, was practical. Medieval haircutting was about practicality rather than style. Men's hair was cut short to prevent it from becoming tangled and infested. Women's hair was kept long but always controlled. Married women were expected to cover their hair completely. This wasn't just a matter of modesty, it was also practical, protecting the hair from dirt and insects. Hairstyles were regulated by social convention. Young unmarried women might wear their hair loose on special occasions. Married women always covered their hair. Men's styles varied by profession and social status. Skin care involved animal fats, egg whites, and herbal salves, not for beauty, but to prevent cracking, chafing, or sunburn. Medieval skin care was purely practical. The goal wasn't beauty but protection. Harsh weather, rough clothing, and manual labor all took their toll on the skin. Those who worked outdoors needed protection from sun, wind, and cold. Simple animal fats, sometimes mixed with herbs, provided a barrier against the elements. Skin care products were made at home, part of the domestic routine. Women were expected to know how to prepare balms and salves for their families. There was care, even tenderness, just not as we might define it today. Medieval people understood the importance of caring for their bodies. They might not have had modern products, but they used what they had with knowledge and care. Religious communities often had the most sophisticated understanding of skin care. Monasteries maintained herb gardens and libraries of medical knowledge. The daily care of the body was a ritual, performed with attention and care. People understood that their bodies needed protection and maintenance. Medical knowledge included detailed understanding of skin care. Physicians and herbalists developed treatments for various skin conditions. The medieval pharmacopoeia included numerous plants used for skin care. Gardens were planted not just for food, but for medicine and cosmetics. Knowledge of skin care was passed down through families. Mothers taught daughters not just how to care for their own skin, but how to prepare remedies for others. Medieval people had realistic expectations about their appearance. They understood that their bodies showed the effects of their lives, work, weather, age. The goal was health and protection, not perfection. Life on the road was dirtier still. Pilgrims walked miles without washing. Knights camped in armor, wrapped in wool and dust. Medieval travel was harsh and dirty. There were no facilities for washing, no clean clothes to change into, no protection from the elements except what travelers carried with them. Inns were few. Clean water, scarcer still. Medieval inns offered basic shelter, but little in the way of cleanliness. Travelers were grateful for a roof over their heads and a place to rest, even if washing facilities were minimal. Yet even here, people tried to rinse their feet in a stream, to wipe their hands before meals, to fold their clothes at night, and shake out the dust in the morning. Streams and rivers were lifelines for travelers. They provided not just water for drinking, but opportunities for basic washing. Pilgrims would plan their routes around water sources. Even in the harshest conditions, travelers maintained basic routines of cleanliness. They understood that caring for their bodies and belongings was essential for surviving the rigors of travel. Cleanliness was not about fragrance. It was about function and a bit of dignity wherever it could be found. Medieval pilgrims came from all walks of life. Rich and poor, noble and peasant, they all faced the same challenges on the road. Social distinctions mattered less when everyone was equally dirty and tired. Monasteries along pilgrimage routes provided essential services. They offered not just food and shelter, but opportunities for washing and spiritual renewal. These were oases of cleanliness in a dirty world. Pilgrims collected badges as proof of their journeys. These small metal objects were among their most prized possessions, carefully cleaned and preserved despite the harsh conditions of travel. Knights on crusade faced even greater challenges. They traveled for months or years, fighting battles in foreign lands. Their armor became their second skin, rarely removed. In military campaigns, weapon maintenance took priority over personal hygiene. A rusty sword could mean death in battle. A dirty body was uncomfortable, but rarely fatal. Medieval merchants were perhaps the most traveled people of their time. They crossed continents, carrying goods between distant markets. Their lives were spent on the road, far from the comforts of home. Merchants learned to protect their goods from the elements. They understood that cleanliness and dryness were essential. For preserving the quality of their merchandise, women travelers faced particular challenges. They had to maintain some semblance of modesty and cleanliness while dealing with the harsh realities of medieval travel. River crossings were both challenges and opportunities. The water was an obstacle to overcome, but also a chance to clean. Dust from faces and hands. Experienced travelers learned to pack efficiently. They carried only the essentials, but those essentials always included some means of maintaining basic hygiene. Cities were magnets for travelers, precisely because they offered amenities unavailable on the road. The promise of a bath, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed made the hardships of travel worthwhile. The dirt of travel was understood to be temporary. People judged travelers not by their appearance, but by their character and their stories. A dirty pilgrim was still a holy person. A muddy merchant was still a valuable trading partner. Medieval travel created a web of connections across Europe and beyond. Despite the hardships, people traveled constantly, carrying goods, ideas, and stories between distant communities. Some travelers kept detailed records of their journeys. These accounts provide invaluable insights into the realities of medieval travel, including the constant challenges of maintaining cleanliness and dignity on the road. So, was medieval hygiene disgusting? By modern standards, yes. But through their eyes, it was simply reality, a set of quiet routines shaped by faith, fear, and the limitations of the world around them. There were no daily showers, no toothpaste, no deodorant. But there was intention. There was care, and the washing of a shirt, and the brushing of hair, and the choice to mask odor with herbs. Medieval people weren't indifferent to cleanliness. They simply worked within their constraints, technological, economic, and social. They did what they could with what they had. Disgust is a modern reaction. They didn't feel it. They simply lived. Medieval hygiene was about more than cleanliness. It was about social order, religious belief, and human dignity. People maintained their practices not because they were ignorant, but because these practices made sense in their world. Understanding medieval hygiene requires setting aside our modern assumptions and seeing the world through medieval eyes. What seemed disgusting to us was simply life to them. They weren't trying to meet our standards. They were trying to meet their own. And by their own standards, they largely succeeded. Medieval people created beauty where they could. They made their lives as pleasant as possible within their limitations. They found dignity in small gestures and daily rituals. The medieval world was one of contrasts. Great wealth alongside grinding poverty. Magnificent cathedrals rising from muddy streets. Elaborate courtly rituals and crude waste disposal. But at every level of society, people found ways to care for themselves and each other. The wealthy, with their pomanders and scented baths. The poor with their careful washing of hands before meals. The pilgrims shake dust from their clothes each morning. What we see as primitive, they saw as necessary. What we see as crude, they saw as practical. What we see as disgusting, they saw as life. Medieval hygiene was imperfect by our standards, but it was perfectly adapted to medieval life. People did what they could with what they had, and they found ways to maintain their humanity in the process. Lived, they loved, they worked, and they died, all within their understanding of cleanliness and care. And in their own way they were clean. And so we end not with judgment, but with understanding. We've walked quietly through their world. We've seen their bathhouses and their bedchambers. We've watched them wash their linen and tend their bodies. We've understood their fears and witnessed their small acts of care. Medieval people were not so different from us. They wanted to be clean, to be comfortable, to be dignified. They simply had different tools, different knowledge, and different constraints. They made their beds, they said their prayers, and they slept as peacefully as they could in their imperfect but human world. Thank you for walking quietly through history tonight. May your evening be clean in body and in spirit, and may you rest peacefully with all windows open and all chamber pots emptied. Good night.